Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever the honorable members are, and welcome to our session, Preventing a Learning Crisis from Becoming a Catastrophe. I think we are most grateful that our organization has been able to bring us all together to focus on that very, very important topic. I'm Professor Jeffrey Lungwangwa, Member of Parliament, Zambia. I've been a Member of Parliament since 2006. This is my third 5-year session in Parliament. I was Minister of Education in Zambia, Minister of Transport and Communication. In my academic career,
hello.
I was Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Zambia. Hello? Are we communicating? Oh, okay. This afternoon, we have two distinguished presenters who are joining us. We have Mr. James Savandra, who is the Global Director for Education at the World Bank. And he has done a lot of work in the area of learning poverty. And he will provide for us the situation in terms of the crisis of learning in our schools globally. And of course, how COVID has exacerbated the crisis. Then we are going to be joined by Dr. Mini Bajje, Chief Executive Director of Pratham Education Foundation in India. And she will share her experiences in that area. And I think we are going to have a very exciting discussion. And we look forward to active participation of all honorable members in different parts of the world, sharing our experiences in terms of the learning crisis in education and how this can be prevented. So that's by way of introduction. And I think at this point, I would request our first presenter to make his presentation.
Mr. Chairman, if I may interrupt for 1 second, just to tell participants that we also have simultaneous translation into French available for our French speakers. That is available by looking at the bottom of your screen, and there's a globe there with the words interpretation underneath it. By clicking on that, you can select French interpretation. So thank you to our interpreter today, and welcome if you are coming from the French-speaking world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. So can we have our first presentation? Your opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Lungwangwa, and thank you very much to you and to Joe for the invitation to this International Parliamentary Network. It's an honor for me to try to share some thoughts about how the world is doing in the context of this pandemic and what are the challenges ahead. I would like to share my screen. I hope that technology will help us to do that. And I would like the team to guide me if that is happening or not. Are you fine? Can you see my screen now the right way? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So look, I just want to start with the let me see if this is helping me. Okay, great. Yeah, it's working. Thank you very much. So just to put things in context, I mean, we're living an historical event. This is the worst crisis that the education system is facing of the last 100 years, as you see in the graph in the to the left. I mean, most in the red parts. I mean, at some point in May, basically all education systems in the world were closed. We have 1.7 billion children, I mean, whose lives were interrupted. It's 1/7 of the population of the world, right? Who they should have been in school and they were at home or in their communities. Things have improved a little bit, as you see in the yellow parts. Some schools have been opening, but this has been a protracted process, right? So New York City on Thursday closed again, and Pakistan, the whole Pakistan nationwide has closing back. Again, there's schools. So we're going to be living a protracted process in terms of the school closures or school openings, a process during the coming weeks and months. But in addition to this long period of school closures, would we have never lived, I mean, in terms of length during these, the last decades. In addition to that, we have the worst economic recession, right, of the last century. And that obviously is critical for education, given that then family budgets and public budgets are going to be strained. So precisely at the moment in which we need to invest more in education because our systems now need to be rebuilt, there is much more complications on the public budget fronts. So, but before talking about what's going to be happening in the near future, let me just mention quickly where were education systems just before the pandemic. And if we would have been having this conversation in January of this year, I would have already told you that we were living a learning crisis. And there are many education indicators that we worry about, but let me focus on one that we launched at the World Bank about 1 year ago. That is what we call learning poverty. And learning poverty is the share of children that by age 10 cannot read and understand a simple text. Right? If you think well, that indicator, learning poverty, should be 0, in the same way that extreme poverty or hunger should be 0. All kids should be able to learn at age 10, right? To read at least a simple text by age 10. Unfortunately, in low and middle income countries, in January of this year, that number was 53%. So more than half of kids, even if most of them are in school, they're not learning the fundamentals. So that's not a problem. That is a crisis. That is a huge crisis that education was already living, I mean, a few months ago. I mean, let's, bring the video to today. And our simulations show that this 53% might be going up to 63% as a consequence of the long school closures. And despite the fact that many countries have been trying to improve dramatically their remote learning interventions, but it's in the remote learning, as we're going to see, that will never replace presential education, right? We can do as much as we can, but the learning losses are going to be big. And that's what the data that is coming up is showing us, right? That in both in rich countries or in poor countries, learning losses will be big. But it's not only these indicators of learning, right, or reading, right? In addition to that, we see that there's the possibility of about 10 million children in basic education that might not come back to school, right, after the school closures, because of this reduced accumulation of human capital, because of the learning losses, because of the dropouts. We expect that there might be a loss in lifetime earnings of this generation of about $10 trillion. Those numbers are difficult to grasp, but to have an easier way to understand, is about 10% of global GDP. And I'm not talking here that those will be the losses for the economic system. No, this will be the potential earning losses of this generation, right? And remember that this generation is the one who's going to be paying the debts that all countries are incurring in order to fight the pandemic. Right, so that is something that should really worry us. We know that there is a lot of mental health impacts among students, among teachers, among parents, right? Because of the difficult times that we are all living. There's those issues of lack of socialization that is a critical aspect of education. And unfortunately, we can use this word catastrophe when we talk about inequality. Right, because as I said before, there will be learning losses. The question is, are those learning losses going to be the same for everyone? And the answer is no. right? That impact is going to be largely unequal. And why do I say that? Countries have not been have been doing a lot of stuff during these months. Countries have reacted. They have reacted in terms of investing more in remote education. But unfortunately, countries had not relied on the internet, right, to do more online education, because say in middle-income countries, you would reach 50% of kids that will have a decent connection at home. If you go to poor countries, if you go to sub-Saharan African countries, that number is less than 10%, right? So obviously you cannot use, only the online interventions. That's why most countries have implemented multi-platform remote learning strategies. And that's better because, access to radio or TV, it's more prevalent. And actually many countries really have invested on that. Education TV has come back to the education arena, and that is good. But even with that combination of radio, TV, and internet, you're not really reaching all students, right? And obviously the reach is very different. One thing is a child that can have internet at home, that can connect by Zoom with her teachers or with her peers, and in the other extreme, you will have kids that will have to walk 2 hours in order to get an internet connection and connect through the smartphone of her parents, or just to have a radio signal in a rural area. So the experience is going to be very, very difficult across different types of children. And when we see this from a country level perspective or a regional perspective, if we look at Africa, for instance, which is what you see there, about half of the kids have received nothing, no type of remote learning. And then the other half, a very small 7% in the case of sub-Saharan Africa, have received some connection through online devices, including smartphones, and about 40% through TV, radio, or printed material that has been more actively distributed by governments. If we go to Latin America, it's better, right? A region like Latin America is better. About 55% have received some connection through online. And when I say online, I'm really being very broad and generous, right? I'm not talking about connection with a desktop or a laptop only, but even if it's a smartphone, right? But then about 40% basically radio and TV, right? And the engagement with radio and TV is something, but obviously is very, very far from replacing presential education. So the point that I wanted to make is that depending on the region or the country that you're talking about, and within countries, depending on the socioeconomic level, these remote learning experiences have been extremely, extremely different. So that's why that huge inequality in terms of the learning impacts that we're gonna see. However, this is a bleak picture, I have to say, and we need to internalize that, and we need to make a lot of efforts, right, in order to compensate for this. But I think that countries have the opportunity to build the foundations of the learning of the future if we learn a bit about what has happened in the past. We still need to work on the pillars of education reform in all countries, and the way we organize this at the World Bank in order to simplify such a complex system that our education systems is that all countries have to really work in terms of improving the learners and the home environment, and that is even more important now. We need to continue working on rebuilding socially valued teachers' careers, which is the essential point actually of the quality of an education system. We need to continue investing in more and better learning resources within the classroom. We need to continue working in all countries, improving in having safe and inclusive schools. And when I mean safe, I don't mean only a safe building, but I mean safe in terms of eliminating any type of violence at school, which is something that unfortunately is a huge problem in many countries. And we need to work in improving management of schools. So this menu that I'm putting here is basically, that's the complex tasks that all ministers of education will have. But we can also, in addition to this, which is kind of the bread and butter, right, of education reforms in all countries, I want to close mentioning a couple of lessons from this pandemic. And if we work on these lessons, we can really bring the future to the present. And let me mention a couple of things. One is that we really need, first of all, to close the digital divide, right? We have been talking for the last 30 years that there was a digital divide. Well, this pandemic found us unprepared, and that digital divide has not been closed. Even in rich countries have not been closed. But definitely the situation is much worse in low and middle income countries. And when I say that we need to close the digital divide, is not only about connectivity, it's connectivity, but it's devices, and making sure that kids will have devices, that even poor kids will have some type of device at home. It is about having the right software, is having about the right technical and professional support to teachers such that they can use technology effectively. So we really need to work on that front. But the other lesson of this pandemic is that education now is clear for us, right? It probably should have been clear before, but education is a social phenomenon, right? The school is a social space that is absolutely critical for kids to learn the abilities and all the skills that they need for life. It's not only about teaching, about learning to read, which is one indicator that we're using, but actually the school is the space in which you need to learn not only the reading, the math and the science, but all the skills, the social emotional skills that you need for life. And we know that education is, at the end of the day, about the interaction between the teacher and the student. The magic of learning happens in that interaction. So teachers are precisely those people that will coach, will facilitate, will inspire, will motivate children, right? At the end of the day, children can read Wikipedia and can read a book. Actually, the role of the teacher now is not to be a source of knowledge, but it's really to be an inspirator, right? It's really to be that person that will help the child in their learning process. So at the end of the day, this is school of the future, a future that has been propelled to today, is a school in which we need to balance technology and the human factor. Technology will be critical, but its technologies will be there to help the teacher, right? To be that critical element in the life of students. And the second big lesson, and with this I finish, is that we need to have resilient systems, right? A pandemic, I mean, might happen again, hopefully not, but there will be a monsoon in India, there will be an earthquake in Pakistan or in my country, in Peru, right? Or a hurricane in Haiti, right? So we need really resilient systems, and we need to understand that the education process requires a continuity between the school and the home, right? Children learn everywhere. But to find that continuity between the school and the home, first of all, we need better schools, of course, right? And that's the work of ministries of education. But it also, the work of public policy should be to improve conditions at home. And to improve conditions at home, I'm thinking about many things, but let me emphasize two. One is parents, right? And I think this pandemic has shown that parents and communities as well are key players in children's education. Parents are really starrings in the life of their children. Parents define also the future of their children, right? And everyone has to internalize that, right? But public policy should help parents, right, in order to support the children's education process. And that's something that sometimes we forget and we need to work more on that. And also public policy should strengthen the home environment, right? We need to have more programs in which we make sure that there are books, right, and reading material in the hands of children at home. Right, we have a very interesting program at the World Bank called Read at Home. That is basically that. That's making sure that there's reading material at home and also guides for parents in order to support the learning process of their children. So this resiliency, I think it's in order to be worried because a natural disaster might happen at any moment, but also resiliency is needed because there has to be a continuity in the learning process between the school and the home. And if we are worried about inequalities across schools, we also should be worried about these inequalities that exist in the home environment. This is not easy, right? Trying to work on these dimensions is not easy, but it's not rocket science neither, right? It requires financial commitment and it requires political commitment, but it is doable. It's something that we can work on. If we build on these lessons, we can build better systems. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very, very much for that extremely stimulating presentation. And I think at this point, let me invite Dr. Banerjee, the Chief Executive Officer of Praham Education, to make her comments. on the experiences that they are having in their foundation. Dr. Banerjee?
Yes, thank you, Professor Jeffrey, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to such an eminent panel. I was very curious when I got the invitation to have the opportunity to speak to such a diverse audience. And I'm delighted to meet all of you. And particularly, I see that there are several ladies from the countries around India who are on this meeting today. So special welcome to them from me. I agree with everything that Jaime has said. And I think that the pre-COVID situation, even in India, was very much like what he described. He put it in numbers. If I should put it just in words, I would say that even after 5 years of school in India, if you asked an average child who was in 5th standard and gave them a small story, maybe 10 lines long in their own language, many of them, half of them at least, would have trouble in reading it with any level of comfort. If you gave children a simple subtraction problem, 72 minus 37, about half would have difficulty in doing that in a numerical form. So I think that was the situation we were in. And naturally, we are all very worried that after so many months of being disconnected from the school environment, where our children will be. Couple of things from India, I think, that are worth highlighting. My organization, which is called Pratham, which in many Indian languages means first or primary. So we do a lot of work with primary school kids. We also do a big survey across the country every year called the Annual Status of Education Report. The short version of it is called ASR. It's also done in Pakistan, and we are hoping that one day it will be done in Bangladesh and maybe Nepal as well. But in the ASR report this year, we did not measure reading and arithmetic, which is what we normally do. But we felt it was important to look inside families and find out what was going on when schools were closed. We just finished this in September, and we found two very important things. One is by September, 80% of India's school-going children had textbooks at home for their current grade. So that's a major thing that the government had done, is organize the delivery of textbooks to the homes. They did it in different ways in different states, but the net result was that at least almost 4 out of 5 children had the set of textbooks at home. The second thing that we found is that in the week that we asked the questions of parents, about 70% of children had somebody at home helping them with some kind of learning activity. And when we analyzed that a little bit more, we found that it was mothers, it was fathers, it was a very large number of siblings who were helping, and also community members. And I think this reinforced our faith that whether you're educated or not, everybody wants to give children a helping hand. And so from my own organization, what we've learned in the last couple of months has been that, rather than worry about learning, we have spent a lot of time in engaging children and in building parents' confidence and family members' confidence that they can actually interact with children for learning. When schools are open, everybody expects that all the learning work will be done in school. And parents, particularly parents who are not very educated in India, feel that it's their job to assist in schooling, sending the children to school, but it's the teacher's job to assist in learning. And I think that COVID has opened the doors to who helps whom. And we find that a lot of people are helping each other because that's what you do in a crisis. So what we are doing is we are trying to send a little activity for engaging parents, children, family members to do together to as many homes as possible. And the method of sending it is largely through SMS, because while smartphones exist, often smartphones are not accessible to the children on a regular basis. And we follow that up with a phone call at least once a week to find out how kids are doing, to find out what they've done in the last week, and to suggest activities that they can do that can then be followed up with further phone messages. This two-way communication has been the bedrock of what we've been able to achieve. And I'm not sure how much learning we've achieved, although I think there has been some. But I do think we have achieved kind of a sense of trust, a sense that everybody's looking out for each other. And we feel that the motivation for learning, for parents to feel like they can help their kids, and for kids to feel like they can do something, has gone up quite a bit. In each of the neighborhoods, we call them mohallas in India in many places, just the immediate neighborhood, the lane outside your house, the little maybe area where a bunch of little homes can be there. We've looked for youth volunteers who can do a little bit of a structured activity with children every day, because we feel that there is now a big desire to get back into doing something in a structured way. And then we've had communities at the village level do something maybe once a week, maybe once every fortnight, that can be as simple as a blackboard outside the village council's office, which has a little story or a word problem that any child passing by can see what it is. So home, neighborhood, community, and all getting ready for the fact that when schools open, all of this continuum is going to be needed to help us to get back to where we are. And many cases, these strategies are being shared with the government. We think that if every teacher in India would make 5 phone calls a day, speak to the family, speak to the children, find out how they're doing, then all those textbooks that are at home can also be used better. Of course, there are digital devices and other fancier things that are going on, but we find that the old-fashioned thing of a phone call, an SMS message, a textbook, a worksheet is what a large number of people are using. If I just, before finishing my comment, say that I think it's going to be very important what we do when schools open. There was a study that was done in Pakistan after the earthquake, to look several years after the Pakistan earthquake to see what was the effects on children and on families. And I think the study was very interesting, because what they found is that several years after the earthquake, economically families had recovered. But in terms of learning gaps, children still remain behind. And the researchers attribute this not so much to the fact that schools were closed, but they attribute it to what the schools did when schools opened. And what they did was, there was a big rush to get back to curriculum, big rush back to get back to business as usual, which meant that children who were weak and who were behind to begin with got further behind. So I think that when schools open and when attendance stabilizes, I think it's going to be very important to do 2 things. One is meet and recognize parents for the contribution that they have done in this crisis, and to, I call it, meet them at their right level. Many parents in India don't have much education, and therefore welcome parents in and design activities that they can continue to do to support their children at home. And then meet the children at their level as well, see where they are at, and begin from there. So to many of our state governments, we've been recommending that once schools open and once attendance stabilizes, and once we are sure that schools are going to remain open consistently for a number of days, do a 100-day campaign to build back basic reading and arithmetic. And I think that in many development agencies, they are calling it Build Back Better. And we think there's a very good chance, if we don't go back to business as usual, to be able to build back better once schools open. I have a very, very small video just to give you a glimpse of one part of India where we are working both with the government and with the village governments, and using both SMS and radio as a way to cope with the situation. And maybe just this little 1-minute glimpse that Zoe maybe can help me to show you, will leave you with at least an idea of what we are trying to do in India.
या लॉकडाऊनच्या काळात शाळा, अंगणवाडी बंद आहे आणि मुलं पूर्ण वेळ घरी आहे, पण थोडा तरी अभ्यास व्हायलाच हवा ना. म्हणूनच शाळेबाहेरची शाळा या विशेष कार्यक्रमामध्ये मी आरजे रेश्मा आपल्या सगळ्यांचं स्वागत करते.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much to our presenters. I think we have heard very complimentary presentations on the subject of learning crisis and how to prevent it from becoming a catastrophe. We have been given figures of children who may lose their opportunities for learning, you know, and the different situations in different parts of the world, the inequality that is arising among children in the different parts of the world, and what can be done in terms of what can be done by the governments in the homes to provide a learning environment, conducive learning environment in the homes, assisting parents, communities, what can be done in schools, what can be done with children. I think these presentations have been extremely thought-provoking. And I think at this point, I will invite distinguished honorable members to make their comments very briefly, because we don't have much time.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the Honourable Asia Atak in Pakistan has her hand up. If we go to her.
Yes, Honourable.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, Honourable.
Good to see you, all the females and all the members of the international forums. I think it's my first time to speak in this forum, and I am joined. Unfortunately, I missed the last one, but now this time I'm here for. It's a very, it's a very important task during this pandemic that our children's the educations of our children are suffers a lot in this situations in this area of pandemic. But one can I see very short that our government in the very start of the first wave of the pandemic started, we have taken really good initiatives to save our children or to save our peoples, and which is very helpful regarding in the same situation that we have almost control over the pandemic and their situations. The first waves with the increase of heat in our country, the waves are almost is to be over. But now as soon as possible, the season is changed. Is a seasonal a situation is come over, and now again the second wave is come around the in our country. So we have taken a lot of initiatives against for the same purpose, to how to save our childrens and how to save our people from such a pandemic area. And of course, after the health, the educations of the people's education of the children are most suffered from this pandemic. We have now the last day our government announced vacations. Earlier winter vacations in such a situations, and the second day we have give a very useful plan to the children for the same situation. They will have an off if they in a higher education, mean in the secondary education, if they can use the internet, and where the internet facilities available. Of course, it's a very difficult situation in most of our areas which are suffer from most of the terrorism, because I belong to the part of the countries where the areas are mostly suffered from the terrorism in the past. And also the same Rukmini ji mentioned that we have a lot of this area. I belong to the same place where the earthquake suffers a lot of our peoples, and of course, and then internal dispersed persons are there from. I belong to the Northwest Frontier Province, and this is the very, it's our unfortunate that we are suffering from much more the man-made disease and the natural pandemic situation. So we are doing a lot. We have giving a very useful plan to children. That yes, we have start earlier the winter vacation, and another things we are giving them a home task, and
okay, Honorable. Honorable, can you summarize so that we invite others to make their comments as well? Just summarize,
Yes,
please.
why not? Why not? I'm just give me us 1 minute, and then I will will say. We are giving a very useful plan in this time for the school childrens, that they will have an off and they will oftenly visit schools, that they will take their guidance and their homework from the teachers, and they will do that and finish their task, and then will they come in another weeks, and they say, so they will take again the task, and we are postponed their exams also. So I think we are giving them a really successful plan, but it's what the result is. At the end, we will see all this. Yes, yes, you can carry on with another people's. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable, for sharing your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, honorable members, other comments?
Yes, please. Can I?
Yes,
sir?
please go ahead. Please go ahead. Go ahead, Honorable.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon or good evening to all of you. I found this presentation by Professor Jaime, and
Good afternoon, Honorable.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Professor Jaime and Dr. Rukmini Banerjee about the current situation and very solid and simple solution which Ms. Banerjee has explained to us. I think my concern is that the model which Mrs. Banerjee has applied in India, in particular Maharashtra, this is quite simple, but very engaging in the process of engaging the whole family, the community, and the local government. And I think this is not known to many of us. And this can be a very powerful device which can be replicated, because we are all very concerned. We are deeply struggling to work out some solution, because the gap, the poverty will be quite huge. And the whole issue of the balancing between the technology and the human relationship within the parents and within the institution, educational institution, how to do it. This is where I am grappling with, because the presentation which was presented, I didn't find any solution to that, but I do not expect to find all solution at the moment, because it is an experiential learning as we do, as that's the way we learn. But the fantastic part was the delivery of the textbooks to each and every house. And that has been, I think, a tremendous success for this model, which is very simple. And the government of the planet, of each country, will be very interested to learn about this particular method, so that we can engage the parents, we can engage the community, we can engage the government, so that it becomes much more simpler in a way, because we will not be able to find any very solution right away, because the pandemic will continue for another, 3.5 years. That's our assumption. But we have not made any calculation. We do not know the calculation about the level of inequality and the poverty for education. So this is one thing which I am very interested to learn, so that it can be discussed with our government of Bangladesh, and Bangladesh government will be very keen and very interested to understand about this whole model, from engaging the youth, and from home to neighborhood, and from neighborhood to the communities, because SMS, the normal SMS, and the local radios are very popular also in Bangladesh. And this is, I think, it's a tremendous kind of an experience which Mrs. Banerjee, Rukmini Banerjee has shared with us. And we also can, within the region, I was thinking about this 100-day campaign and what are the elements in the 100-day campaigns. So maybe we can further discuss. This is what I was thinking, that it should be, this model should be shared, and the 5 pillars and should be transmitted, and to work out very simple and easy device for the underprivileged children, also the children of all age, of all class, in all the continents, particularly with the developing countries. This is what my concern was, that how I did find out somehow, but how to, I mean, engage them and transmit this learning so that we can have, like, we can overcome this pandemic to some extent. That's what my point was, Mrs. Banerjee, and to all of you, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable. Thank you.
Professor?
Thank you very much for your comments. Can we have one more?
Can I just interject for one very short one, please? I have a
Yes,
question
please.
for Professor Hemi. When you presented and you showed all these statistics, I took a step back because I used to deal with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the goals that every country committed to was to alleviate poverty and alleviate illiteracy. And it appears that we've been throwing money to the problem and the problem is not resolving. So then I looked at Professor Banerjee's presentation. And I realized that it is civil society and people like organizations, Pratham organizations that are in the forefront are very creative. So how do we as an organization ensure that those snippets that Mrs. Banerjee has shared with us can be replicated, and that we do not throw money to the problem? Because a lot of countries are saying, why am I throwing money to this problem when it doesn't seem to get the traction it needs? And the thing that Mrs. Banerjee has talked about can be utilized in a country like Canada as well, in the remote territories. And I think nobody can say it's not workable or replicable, or that we in the developing countries are better than the developed countries or whatever. So those are my 2 thoughts, and I thank you both for your presentations.
Thank you very much. Can we have some comments from our presenters? Dr. Banerjee?
Sure. This is, fantastic to hear the responses from from all of you. I just wanted to elaborate just a little bit. I think that this is the time as well, and maybe I can only speak for India. I think that this is the time that people are actually recognizing. I mean, we are calling it the digital divide. But I see, whether at the national level or at the local level, a real concern for those who are being left out. I mean, there are many people who are left out, many children who are left out earlier, but now it somehow seems very stark. And the fact that schools are closed is such an unusual situation. So this is the time, I think, that this learning for all, what can we do to ensure that when kids come back, everybody comes back? This is the time, I think, to play on it. The video that you saw where the radio program is being broadcast from loudspeakers, the government made an appeal not just to the education department, they made an appeal to the Women and Social Welfare Department, which runs our preschool, our early childhood care programs, as well as to the rural development departments, to say that this reaching out to children is everybody's business, not only the business of the education department. And one of the things that the village councils, we call them the sarpanch, the head man or the head woman of the village, they put out appeals to local youth to say, in your own neighborhood, can you help? And very quickly, we started getting a lot of requests to say that We've mobilized 100 young people. Can you give them a few guidelines about what to do with children? So I agree that, you know, when the government works with citizens, I think a lot can be done. And this crisis, I think, has made us all think about the basic fundamentals. Jaime put out 5 pillars, and I'm going to put out 5 other pillars. I think it's made us completely rethink what should be taught, how should it be taught, who can be involved in the teaching, when can it happen, and maybe we will also all start thinking about why are we constructing our education systems that we have in place. So this is a very good time, I think, that you know, we rethink, we try, we experiment, we learn, and take the good things during this crisis, during school closure, that we feel have worked into the system. And so my real request is, don't go back to business as usual, and give it a period. I'm calling it 100 days, but whether it's 100 days or 200 days, give it time for everyone to settle in, meet children at their own level, focus on the basics of reading and the basics of arithmetic from where the child is at, rather than what grade is the child is. Focus on the level of the child rather than the grade of the child, and start working from there. And remember that everybody is willing to help. These would be just my few comments.
Thank you very, very much. Professor Jem, your comments?
Thank you very much, Professor Lungwangwa. I will try to first find if there is an intersection between the pillars that Rukmini was mentioning and our pillars. And I think there is a lot of intersection, and at least from my conceptual perspective, because she was saying who should be in charge. And I think to a certain extent, this pandemic has showed us that it's everyone, right? That obviously teachers have a fundamental role in the future of our children, but also that we need to internalize, and everyone has to internalize, that parents as well and communities as well. If before we were not that conscious of that, I think now we are, and actually we need to help all parents and communities, right, to be really, involved in their children's education process. When she was saying when, is that it relates to the point I was saying about resiliency, right? When? At all times, right? Children learn at school, but children should also learn at home, right? And that learning process at home requires, again, a huge role of parents in terms of their example on the day-to-day basis, and also to support the specific learning process. And we can work a lot, right, in terms of providing, as part of public policy, support to this, to parents. And finally, when she was saying what, is that we really need to worry at this stage about the fundamentals, right? We care about many education indicators. We care about math, about science, about social-emotional skills, about history, about geography. Of course, we care about all those things. But if children are not able to read, right, then all the other education outcomes that we worry about are at risk, right? So we really need to make sure, right, that all children, and when I say all, that is in capital letters, all children are really learning. And I want to finalize reflecting of some of the points that Mrs. Yasmin Ratansi was mentioning. You're absolutely right that when we look at the Sustainable Development Objectives, they state that for 2030, all children should have quality primary and secondary education. That's the statement that all countries have signed for just 10 years from now. Unfortunately, I don't think that will happen. It won't be possible that all children would have quality primary and secondary education, right? Remember that the simple number that I was mentioning, right? If kids at age 10 are not being able to read a simple text, read and understand a simple text, that means that kids that are finishing primary, right? Most of those kids are in school, right? Many are not. We still have in the world 250 million children who are not in school, but we have 1.6 billion children who are in school. So most of them are in school, are not learning enough, right? So we do not have quality primary education for our children as of today. It will be impossible in 10 years, that will happen for all children in primary and in secondary. That will not happen. So that is why we were looking for a simple indicator, that learning poverty indicator, so that everyone will not be kind of dizzy with all the indicators that we care. Let's focus on something that is very simple and that all parents can understand. Is your child able to read and understand? And if today half of them are not able, right, it will be very difficult that the number, that learning poverty, is going to be 0 in 10 years. Let me mention a few more figures. That 53% that I was mentioning is for all low and middle income countries, but that number it varies across regions. In sub-Saharan Africa, that number is close to 90%. So 90% of kids at age 10 are not able to read and understand the text. In South Asia, the number is around 55% or close to 60%. In Latin America, it's 45%, right? In East Asia, it's lower. In East Asia, that number is around 20, right? So there's a huge dispersion within the world, right? But in many poor areas, that number is just too high, right? So our systems, our education systems, are not delivering yet the fundamentals. And a lot of the solution comes from interventions like what Rukmini was describing, right? Interventions in which you bring in the community and parents. Teachers still have a fundamental role, right? Rukmini is not saying that this is now about learning at home only. No, the school is absolutely central to the whole process, right? But it's a school that really worries about making sure that those fundamental skills, right, are something that all our children acquire, right? And the problem that many of our systems have is that they teach to part of the classroom, to the best children of the classroom, and they're not really worried. Teachers are not really worried that all children should learn. And children are different. They're heterogeneous. Some children learn faster than others, but we really need to make that we provide all children, right, that good experience. That's why the teacher is so important. So the homework is very large. We have a huge task, and I just want to close saying that we need to have a sense of urgency, right? That we do have a crisis, right? But sometimes we see education as a silent crisis, right? Nobody dies, right? But the future of our children is at stake, right? So we really need to have a sense of urgency that we need to move much faster, right, in the reforms that are needed in oral education systems to reach everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think at this point we have 5 minutes. I will invite one compelling comment before we end the session. Do we have one compelling comment from any of the honorable members? Okay.
How untenable is the task, Professor Hammy? When will we reach it? I sit on the CPA Canada, and I was doing an analysis for a strategic plan, and 2030 is what they want to reach. But it is untenable, and people are getting overwhelmed. So what is your crystal ball telling us?
Yeah, so I don't have a crystal ball, but what we can have is an objective, right? A more realistic objective, right? So saying that this learning poverty that today is about 53%, that it will go to 0 in 2030, that won't happen, and we need to be realistic. But we need, and I'll send you a document that we wrote exactly a year ago, in which we tried to put that global target of reducing that 53% to half by 2030. And why we were saying reducing it to half, right? Because to do that, countries will have to double or triple their rate of improvement every year, right? In terms of making sure that more kids are literate, right? Countries are improving. Yes, they have been improving during the last 15 years, but at a very slow rate. We have seen an improvement, but it has been very slow. We need to speed that up. We need to move faster. But to reduce to half, we need to almost triple, right, that rate of improvement. Is that feasible? Yes. Is that difficult? Yes, as well. It is difficult, right? But if we have a clear target, right? And actually what I'm saying is that each country, all countries should have that target of reducing it by half. Each country has to find its own path, its own way. But it's very important that each country, first of all, knows where they are, right? Every country has to see what's the magnitude of their problem and then define, okay, this is the path that we want for the next 10 years. This is how much we want to improve. This is how much we want to reduce this learning poverty. In the same way that we have objectives of reducing hunger or reducing extreme poverty, we need to have objectives of reducing this learning poverty, right? And each country has to find its own way, but I think having a clear plan, right, with targets, it will be absolutely essential.
Thank you very, very much. And I think at this point, it remains for me, on behalf of all the distinguished honorable members who have participated, to thank our presenters. You really have given us stimulating, thought-provoking analysis of the current crisis in our education system. And they hope that this can be alleviated if we all work together. Education authorities, the homes, communities, and all those who are concerned about making a difference in education for our children. There can be hope. There is hope. And it remains for all of us as members of parliament to advocate very strongly about the importance of education and the crisis that our children are in. If we do that in our respective parliaments, we shall be able to draw the attention of governments to the crisis in education and how it can be alleviated for the good.
Colleagues, I might just use this opportunity as the screen from the chairman freezes.
Of our children. So thank you very much, International Parliamentarians Network on Education. Valuable, extremely thought-provoking, and we are most grateful sharing their thoughts on the.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, one last thing from us. There will be a session next week. We're picking up the issue of equity and inclusion, which has been touched on today. And then a reminder that our final session will be on financing the week later. All of these things interact and are mutually supportive in addressing the issues that we've heard about today. And the last thing I would like to say is you will all receive a briefing from us on this topic about learning poverty and learning. The slides that Jaime shared will also be available and with additional background material. So look out for that because there was a lot to take on today, but a very, very kind of persuasive call to action from both Jaime and Rukmini today that we need to tackle these foundational skills for those who risk being left furthest behind. So thanks for joining today. Hopefully we'll see some of you next week. And a second thank you from the IPNED Secretariat to our two speakers. Go well, everyone, and stay safe.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Thanks
for the invitation. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.